Hello, this is Joe Firestone for Real Progressives, and this is my maiden voyage, but we're going solo. I hope everybody can hear me. Can you hear me? Oh, looks like we got at least one post. Nope, maybe not. So, okay, anybody there yet? Oh, hi, Patricia Ann, how are you? Hi, Robin. Hi, Mark. Hi, Dan. Hi, Nick. Hi, Lee. Hi, Dolores. Thank you. I'm glad you all can hear me. So I guess then I will wait just a little longer and then I'll start. The title of this broadcast is Fiscal Myths of Austerity, and welcome to all. Somebody asked if they can get a shout out. Yes, Saeed, you can get a shout out. Okay, I'm glad the quality of the sound is good. That's excellent. I'm going to move my system a little further away. Oh, hi, Sandy. How are you? Okay. So, austerity policy is justified by arguments from monetary scarcity. Using these arguments, our politicians argue against supporting programs like Medicare for All, full employment legislation, supporting environmental and climate change programs, supporting programs creating new energy foundations, supporting student debt jubilees, supporting infrastructure programs, creating Social Security benefits comparable to those in other nations, getting free publication at all levels for everyone, and having stronger safety nets, and also quite a number of other things that we need. We've seen over the last 40 years a buildup of problems that we as a society seem incapable of handling. One of the functions of government is to allow us as a society to adapt to social problems. Now, certainly, some of this burden also falls on the private economy and also on our social systems. But a very important adaptive function is the government's capacity to help us to solve our problems. And what we've been seeing is that our government is paralyzed by the austerity outlook, the monetary scarcity outlook, and it will not give us the financial resources we need to adapt to change. We've had massive population growth in this country since the 1970s. We've had revolutionary technological changes in many ways. We've had also the growth of many negatives, like environmental problems, problems with our energy foundations, resource problems of all kinds, terrible infrastructure problems. And our politicians seem incapable of legislating to allow us to adapt to these changes. Now, this is intolerable. It was intolerable in the 1990s. It was intolerable in the early 2000s. In the second decade of the 21st century, it is utterly intolerable. We have to stop it. There are many people who have remarked on Real Progressives before that our very survival is at stake, not only as a nation, but the survival of the human race. This is true, okay? But in addition, we're getting increasingly serious conflicts here, so that before perhaps we get a failure in human survival, perhaps a good deal before it, we may find that our nation breaks apart. We've got to legislate for public purpose, and we've got to legislate in such a way so that we can solve our problems. Opposition to the program that I've mentioned causes needless, unnecessary deaths in the hundreds of thousands over a period of a decade. These deaths dwarf the fatalities we've experienced from terrorism here. They rival the number of deaths that have been experienced across the world from terrorism. We've just got to organize politically to do something about these things. And part of that organization, okay, is our efforts here at Real Progressives to dispel the fiscal myths of austerity. We need to mount a major effort to dispel these myths. We have to dispel them and defeat the propaganda that asserts them as justification for ignoring the many social and justice problems that we face. We all need to oppose these myths whenever we see them. And when people repeat them, we need to contradict them and to tell everyone that these are false myths, and they must always and everywhere be opposed by people of goodwill. Now let's get into some of the myths. The first, and one of the most pernicious of all the myths, is this notion that the government is running out of money. Many politicians have told us that we are running out of money. Fairly early in the administration of our last president, in 2009, President Obama told everybody in a public statement that we're running out of money. Many other politicians said, we've run out of money. We have no money. In saying that we have no money, what they were saying was that the federal government can only raise money through taxing and borrowing. And we have this huge total of debt instruments out there. At the time, early in the Obama administration, they were talking $13 to $14 trillion. Now people are talking about more like $20 trillion. You hear that figure constantly cited. $20 trillion. That's the debt mountain that we have to climb. And the only way we can climb it is by taxing people and by selling debt instruments to people. They call that basically borrowing money. And they suggest that we've already borrowed too much money and that we have to stop. And we'll get into more specific myths in just a little while that are more explicit about that. But they say we can't tax anymore and we cannot borrow anymore. This in spite of the fact that the tax burden here is among the lowest in the developed world. And our services, of course, are also among the poorest. But they still insist we cannot tax anymore. And in fact, the Trump administration is getting ready now to make a big present of tax cuts to the very rich and to large corporations, while at the same time cutting what little of the social safety net we have left, or much of that anyway. So, of course, our government cannot run out of money unless Congress lets the government run out of money. Because it's Congress that performs the basic funding acts of appropriating money for spending. That is the step in getting money into the Treasury spending account that cannot be foregone. If the Treasury is to spend, it must have the congressional appropriations. That is to say, it must have the congressional funding. Then it can use all its tools in order to get some more credits from the Federal Reserve placed in its spending account. However, the government, our monetarily sovereign government, can always create, through the Federal Reserve, the money that it needs to spend mandated congressional appropriations. And in addition, it can always find the money that it needs to repay previous debts, to repay the debt instruments when they fall due. Now, in previous broadcasts, I've gone over the mechanics, of all this stuff. But the basic point to oppose the Austerians with is to tell them that no, the government is not running out of money, that the capacity to spend is literally limitless. Now, we don't want to do limitless spending or anything close to that because of the consequences of that. But there is far more policy space existing than we're using now to take care of our needs. We aren't spending what we need to spend. And we have the capacity to spend what we need to spend. And there is no way that we are running out of money because we always have the capacity to create the money we need to spend congressional appropriations and also to repay our debts. We are, in fact, required to repay our debts by the 14th Amendment of the Constitution. Those debt instruments have got to be paid back. Congress doesn't have any choice in the matter. It would be unconstitutional not to fund the spending necessary to repay our debts. Okay. So, we get to the second myth, which is, again, the myth that government can only raise money to spend by taxing or borrowing. Now, this is not true. As you've heard here many times, taxes do not fund spending. But in Stephanie Kelton's critical study, she also showed that neither do the funds derived from selling debt instruments fund spending. Those funds, the funds raised through taxation and the funds raised through selling debt instruments, through borrowing, quote unquote, are destroyed when the Federal Reserve gets a hold of them. It doesn't put those funds into the Treasury spending account. It destroys those funds. After that, it uses its power derived from Congress, or delegated to it by Congress, in order to mark up the Treasury accounts with entirely new, high-powered money in the form of reserves that it creates. So literally, taxes do not fund spending, and sales of debt instruments do not fund spending. So the $20 trillion worth of debt that we have out there now, none of the money that we received in incurring those debts funded anything. All that money was destroyed by the Federal Reserve when it created new reserves to replace that money within the Treasury spending account. That's the case because the only kind of money that can exist in the Treasury spending account is high-powered money. And other than coins, the only high-powered money in existence today is either created by the Federal Reserve in the form of the reserves that it creates, or is created by the Bureau of Engraving and Printing on order of the Federal Reserve. So, the Federal Reserve handles the mechanics of actually creating new money that is high-powered money. What is high-powered money? I'm going to be very circular about this, Patricia Ann. High-powered money, that is to say the money that is most credit-worthy, that is most valued, that backs all of the other money in our federal system, is constituted by the reserves that the Federal Reserve creates, by the currency that it orders from the Bureau of Engraving and Printing, and by the coins that are created by the Mint, a division of the Treasury Department. Those three things are high-powered money. All of the other money is money that is created by the banks in the process of making loans. That constitutes probably 97% of our money supply out there right now, the overwhelming majority of our money supply. But that money is not money that can be used to directly settle legal debts, or that can be used directly to pay taxes, to settle tax debts. The chain of transactions that settles tax debts has finally to be settled with high-powered money that is used to pay those debts, and that the Federal Reserve then destroys. So, it's the Federal Reserve and the Treasury that creates our new money. It isn't really created by our taxing and our borrowing operations. So, as we've said countless times here before, what's the purpose of those operations? Well, first, taxing has the central purpose of guaranteeing the value of the high-powered money of the federal government, because people need this high-powered money to settle their legal debts and their tax debts. If there were no taxation, then there would be much less incentive to acquire and hold high-powered money. So that's the first purpose. And the second purpose is really one of the purposes of the Federal Reserve Bank. And that purpose is to drain reserves from the economy so that the Federal Reserve can hit its target interest rates. By taxing, one of the things the federal government actually does is to enable the Federal Reserve to drain reserves from the private economy in the course of its operations. So, the taxing and the sale of the debt instruments can both be very valuable and are very valuable.